And now I'm going to start the session and let people in. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. You've come to the right place to the Wednesday session of our 2021 WOW event. We're thrilled to have you here. We're going to allow just a couple of minutes as people start joining the session. We know it takes just a few minutes for that to load, and we'll be doing our administrative announcements as well so that we can get those out of the way and get on to the main event that you all came here to see. So allow me to welcome you once again to the third day of the WOW session. Our experiment in doing this virtually is so far going very well. We're receiving some highly positive feedback, which we're grateful for. And we're also grateful for your participation as well, and your engagement, your interactions, your questions that you've been asking have been excellent. Quite a discussion yesterday around ways of automating and creating shortcuts to internal audit and considerations for IT audits. Really fantastic conversation the day before about creating resiliency in organizations through different types of leadership approaches, strategies, and teamwork efforts. And then today, we'll be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to a lot of people's hearts, for better or for worse, oftentimes for worse, and that is ransomware. But we'll be talking, of course, about how to create resiliency in against this type of threat and this type of attack. So we'll be focusing on the ways to fortify your organizations and understand the risks and prepare for those types of things. So hopefully focusing on the better. So we'll allow just another minute or so as people are coming into the session. It's 12 o'clock now, so that means I'm going to start doing the administrative announcements so that I can get some of those types of things out of the way and that we can get on to the event that you're all here for. So welcome again to the Wednesday session of WOW. This session is another lunch and learn session that will go from 12 to 1 p.m. These first 5 minutes, just like the previous days, are brief introductions and administrative announcements. Then from approximately 12:05 to 12:55, we will have our featured presentation talking about resiliency against the threats of ransomware. At the last 5 minutes, we'll have our final comments and our wrap up, and of course our raffle. Our presenters are going to allow a little bit of time for some question and answer. So please, as always, feel free to use the Q&A module to ask those questions. Actually, you can even write those questions anytime that they're occurring to you throughout the presentation, even though we often wait until the end of the session to go ahead and start addressing those questions. I know that sometimes it's easier to write those things as they're coming to your mind. Please feel free to do that. Once again, you can do that using the functionality that is made available to you through Zoom, which is one of the main reasons that we encourage you to use the Zoom client, the application in your local host. Chrome is the next best option for those people who are not able to use the Zoom client, which we do understand is different from environment to environment, organization to organization. And so regardless of which of the methods you're using to experience the session, we encourage you to put your questions in there. Any types of technical issues we can attempt to address in chat. Our ability to address some of those is limited, but we'll try to help you out when and where we can. Of course, the 1 hour of CPE credit will be offered for this session, and those certificates will be sent within approximately 1 week. It helps us if you sign into these sessions using your real name, because we perform a reconciliation between the registration platform and this Zoom session in order to distribute those CPE certificates. This is the same link that you've been using every day. We'll use this same link again on Friday for our session. That the only time that you will use a different link for the session is tomorrow. Tomorrow is not a lunch and learn event. It's a 5:30 p.m. event that we're doing in partnership with SIM, where they're talking about, we are all talking about taking action, diversifying leadership pipelines. That's tomorrow at 5:30. Of course, that link is on our website as well. And please feel free to go ahead and register separately for that to make sure you can participate in that for tomorrow. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and move into some real quick introductions. I'm Rob Valdez. It's my pleasure to be with you again today. I'm serving as the president of ISACA South Florida, and I'm here to assist you in whatever way I can. The email address in the upper right-hand corner is a good way to reach me. Also hosting with us today is Clay Mogenberg, a director at large for the chapter. We're extremely grateful for all the people who are responsible for organizing this event in the background, including the committee for the WOW event, which does include Clay, as well as Maria Ariz, the director of certifications. We're grateful to her as well, and the ever helpful Sandra Pares, the director of programming, who is largely responsible for a lot of the coordinating activities that go on to make these sorts of things happen. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, you see a reminder that the session engagement can be done through the Q&A module, and technical issues can be done in chat. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce to you as well some of the very important people, and specifically one very important person, because we're deeply grateful to our hosts and presenters today, which include ERMProtect. And I'm going to introduce to you now Judy Miller, who is with ERMProtect and will be helping moderate some of this session today. And please take it away, Judy. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody for joining. As he said, I'm Judy Miller. I'm Director of Forensics at ERMProtect Cybersecurity Solutions. We've been in Miami, Florida for a little over 23 years. Today, we're going to talk about a very hot topic, which is how to battle the ransomware threat effectively from a technical perspective, but also some of the legal considerations of paying ransom, which can get you in a little bit of trouble these days. And Patricia will talk about that. The first speaker will be Akash Desai. He works for us here at ERMProtect. He's going to cover the latest ransomware threats and countermeasures. Akash directs complex cybersecurity assignments for us, and he specializes in penetration testing, comprehensive risk assessments, data compliance, digital forensics, and remediation. Patricia, whose picture you see there, is a founding partner of the ARHMF law firm. She represents many businesses, and in particular, financial institutions and banks in legal and regulatory matters, as well as transactional matters. She specializes in compliance, including AML and OFAC, which recently warned that ransomware payments may subject companies to fines. So this is a big development that she's going to talk about. She successfully represents financial institutions in enforcement matters, as well as in remediation efforts to comply with enforcement action. And as Rob said during the session, if you have any questions, just click the Q&A button, and at the end, Rob will lead a session too, and we'll get to as many as we can. And with that, I'm going to throw it over to Akash.
Good morning, everyone. Let's start by taking a look at the 2020 data breach picture. It's not a pretty picture, as you can see on the slide. All the numbers are going in the wrong direction. The average total cost of a data breach has climbed to $3.86 million. As expected, with the move to remote work due to COVID-19, that's added $137,000 to the cost of each breach. The average number of days taken to identify and contain an incident has risen to 280 days. And about half of all the breaches were financially motivated, and 80% of these exposed sensitive PII, personally identifiable information. The picture is even worse when it comes to ransomware attacks. These attacks are increasing exponentially. The ransomware attacks cost far more than the average malicious attack, specifically an astounding $4.44 million per attack. By 2021, it's estimated that a new organization is going to fall victim to ransomware every 11 seconds. And the damage from ransomware attacks is estimated to hit $20 billion by next year. A great question to ask at this point is why? Why is ransomware so prolific? For every takeoff, there's a thrust. So, what is the thrust that ransomware has? Why does ransomware work? The dark web. It's one of the biggest reasons for the proliferation of all forms of malware and ransomware. Beneath the visible internet that you surf every day is this place where various forms of malware are sold. Next, what I'm going to do is I'll show you some specific examples so that you're able to see for yourselves what goes on in the dark web. This lethal ransomware is for sale on a dark website for just $39. You can purchase it at the click of a button and the payment of a Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency. The FUD that you see in the headline stands for fully undetectable, which means that mainstream antivirus software will not detect this malicious ransomware. You'll note that the seller even offers a lifetime license so that in the future, if the ransomware does get detected by antivirus software, the seller will provide you with software support such that you can make your ransomware fully undetectable again. Let me put this into a real life perspective. A kid in high school could just buy this and run it to attack several targets and make money off of it. Replace the kid with just about any person badly affected in a war-torn country who needs to make ends meet, and the odds of this happening to you just shot up. The attacker's investment is just $39. Make that the denominator. The numerator is whatever number the attacker makes by collecting ransom from across the world. That's an incredible return on investment, and that's why ransomware works. Even attackers who aren't technical can launch attacks. This hacker site creates a ransomware for you. You just enter the amount of ransom and any specific notes you want to display to the target, and then the hacker does the rest of the work. Whatever earnings you make are shared. You keep 70% of the ransomware payment while sharing 30% of the profits with the hacker. Again, no serious technical knowledge is required here. But what if you're utterly non-technical? I mean, the only thing that you can comfortably do online is log into your email account. That's fine too. You can use ransomware as a service, also available on the dark web. What you see on your screen could easily be a proper sales dashboard. Take a closer look. The clients in here are the individuals or organizations that are infected by the ransomware. The dashboard shows the number of payments the attacker has received and the number of Bitcoin earned, and it even provides today's Bitcoin conversion rate in dollars. This is as non-technical as it gets. You pay for the platform, and a few clicks later, you're on your way to becoming a ransomware hacker. So, to summarize the entire chain, let's zoom out a bit. The ransomware coder, a malicious hacker, creates the ransomware. He uses an anonymous network like Tor to put up the ransomware for sale on the dark web. A ransomware buyer then buys it and has various models and options to select from. We've only covered 3 of them in the previous slides. The buyer then lets the ransomware loose using the World Wide Web to various individuals and organizations. The victims then pay up to get their data back using a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. And then depending on the model that the buyer used, he then pays the hacker, again using a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. It's all a very well planned and well executed model where the entire chain makes money while still keeping the perpetrators anonymous. One last question you might have is, how big a deal is this dark web thing and the Tor network that helps enable it? It's pretty big. At any given point of time, there are 2.4 million users that connect to the Tor network. At any given time, the Tor network has about 6,500 relays and about 1,800 bridges. On average, there are about 175,000 .onion addresses. A .onion address is the dark web equivalent of a .com address. So think of each .onion address as one website in the dark web. In just the past 3 months, the Tor browser has received an average of 500,000 requests for patch updates. So it's safe to assume that that's the number of Tor browsers in actual deployment around the world. The scope of this problem is huge, and it's affecting multiple industries around the world. Let's take a look at some of the biggest attacks from 2020. Software AG, the second largest software vendor in Germany and the 7th largest in Europe, got hit by ransomware called Corp in October. The ransom that they demanded was $20 million. The company refused to pay, and then data that was stolen from them was soon published on the dark web. ISS World, a Nasdaq listed facility services company based out of Denmark, they faced ransomware attack, leaving hundreds of employees without access to systems or email. This incident cost the company $70 million, including costs involved with regaining access to affected systems and relaunching critical business systems. Cognizant's April ransomware attack is said to have cost the company between $50 to $73 million. Being a Fortune 500 company brought significant media attention to this entire story. Garmin was a big one too. They got hit by a ransomware attack in July that affected their website, call centers, and other services. It was reported that they paid $10 million in ransom. This is by far the largest recorded payout for a ransom. One of the biggest takeaways is that the data in a ransomware attack is not just encrypted. It is logical to assume that it is stolen as well. Also, once you're hit by ransomware, your technical infrastructure is compromised. It cannot be trusted anymore. It's not just one machine that is being hit. Everything else that's connected to it is not trustworthy anymore either. The hackers are in this for the money, so trusting them to keep their side of the bargain once you pay up is a fallacy. But most importantly, after what we'll cover in the next segment today, you'll realize that paying the ransom is no longer even an option.
Thank you, Akash. Our next speaker, Patricia, is going to cover the legal implications of paying ransomware. And when Patricia is done, then Akash will come back to talk about specific strategies to combat ransomware. And finally, as we said earlier, there will be a Q&A session at the end. So do send in your questions and Rob will make sure they get answered. And I'm not sure we mentioned that we are also having a random raffle to pick some winners of some $100 Amazon gift certificates, which you will receive from ISACA if you get picked. Patricia, take it away.
Thank you, Judy. I think it's important. One of the aspects of this that why I actually joined with ERM to put this seminar together was that OFAC, who many of you probably identify with the banking industry, had issued some recent guidance with respect to ransomware payments specifically. So just generally, I think it's important to talk about OFAC and the sanctions programs that OFAC has in place. We just got through an administration in the Trump administration that used sanctions in the broadest way possible. It was actually the administration that used sanctions the most. We don't know how this is going to evolve with the Biden administration, although Obama also used sanctions in very creative ways to accomplish some of the foreign policy goals of the United States. So again, sanctioned programs of the U.S. are administered by the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Each sanctions program is unique. These programs do not apply solely to financial institutions. These programs, and you'll see when I talk a little bit about some of the most recent fines, in fact, the Department of the Treasury and OFAC have focused their efforts specifically on non-banking and non-financial services industries for purposes of their enforcement actions. They see that there is a lack of controls in place for companies that are not in the financial services industry, and they feel that that is their softest target really to go after. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Most programs prohibit transactions with certain countries or particular people and provide a structure for licenses, which are the exemptions under those regulations. Some of them are based on executive orders. Most of the most recent ones are signed by the president directly through an executive order. And there's also a number of federal statutes that are broad enough to allow companies to allow OFAC to issue regulations with respect to certain types of programs. Next. There are comprehensive programs imposing broad prohibitions. The most clear example of this is Cuba, which has had a sanction program for over 60 years. And then there's non-comprehensive programs. And the one we're going to talk about specifically today, which relate to cyber criminals, is a non-comprehensive program that was put in place actually initially by President Obama. The programs change on a constant basis, on a daily basis. And there are fines that can exceed several millions of dollars for companies that violate the OFAC sanctions. A company can and is encouraged to voluntarily disclose any violations, which is something we're also going to talk about today. One of the most important ways of reducing a potential fine is through voluntary disclosure of a action or a series of transactions that may have violated the law. The self-disclosure is a mitigating factor under the enforcement guidelines that OFAC has issued. Next slide. Again, as I mentioned, there are exceptions to the prohibitions. Some are located directly in the documents, in the regulations that OFAC issues or in the executive orders. They're called general licenses. They apply to a broad class of people. And then specific licenses, which we'll also talk about today, you can ask OFAC to approve a transaction specifically. It's done on a case-by-case basis, and really OFAC looks at it in the perspective of whether the transaction that you are requesting permission for furthers the foreign policy objectives of the United States. Next slide. So here, as you can see, it's a very, very extensive list of the different sanctions programs that the US has. I think sometimes when people hear of sanctions, they think of Cuba, they think of Venezuela, which has been very popular over the last couple of years, but there are sanction programs all over the world to accomplish different objectives. And one very specific one that we're going to talk about today is the cyber-related sanctions. Next. So in 2015, President Obama signed an executive order that declared a national emergency with respect to the extraordinary threat of national security, foreign policy, and the economy of the US by cyber criminals that were located outside of the US. When OFAC or there's an executive order relating to sanctions, it generally is to pursue an objective of the United States over people that the United States does not have jurisdiction over. So in this case, they believe and are right that most of these culprits are outside of the United States. They're in the Middle East or in Russia and other countries in that area of the world. So this executive order allowed the imposition of sanctions against specific people that were complicit in malicious cyber-enabled activities. There was an additional executive order issued in 2016 after the elections, where there were this executive order targeted people that were trying to affect the U.S. national elections. Next. So as I was saying, it allows the executive order allows OFAC to place people on the SDN list. And when you hear generally about the OFAC list, it is because there are people that the US can identify and they place them on the list, which means that no US person, doesn't have to be a bank, doesn't have to be a financial services company, no US person, I'm a US citizen, I cannot engage in any transaction with such people. And the SDN list includes people, includes the cyber criminals, but it also includes terrorists, it includes drug kingpins, it includes individuals that might be affecting democracy in other parts of the world. So those are all people that are specifically identified and placed on the list. So these were US persons that, including firms that facilitate online commerce or in any way are engaged in online activities, cannot engage in unauthorized transactions with these persons that are on the list. Next. So cyber-related activities, as they're defined in this executive order, include deliberate activities accomplished through unauthorized access to a computer system, including by some type of remote access, hacking, circumventing one or more protection measures, including bypassing firewalls, and compromising security of hardware or software in the supply chain. So these were initially geared towards persons that were hacking basically into the US system, not just the government, but any economic system in the US. So they believed that this would compromise critical infrastructure, included denial of service attacks, which ransomware does, and massive loss of sensitive information. As Akash said, once somebody gets into your system to put ransomware, they just don't have access to, they're just not blocking your system. They actually have access to everything on your system, including confidential customer information, especially if you're dealing with consumers, in your health information, consumer financial information. All of that is information that might be accessible to a customer, accessible to a hacker that comes in with a ransomware. Next. So how we get to this point right now is that on October 1st of last year, OFAC issued an advisory specifically talking about ransomware. And one of the point was that it warned US persons against making or in any way facilitating ransomware payments to cyber actors on behalf of victims. So this included financial institutions, cyber insurance firms, and companies involved in digital forensics and incident response. So a company like ERMProtect. But I think what's important is if your company gets hit with a ransomware attack, this guidance is meant for you. If you assist companies that get hit with ransomware attacks, this guidance is for you. So the OFAC warns that the payments not only encourage future ransomware demands, but will violate OFAC cyber-related regulations. Next slide. So these are some of the persons that have been placed on the list since 2015 and 16. And they're specifically individuals in other countries that have been involved in massive ransomware attacks. And I think these individuals are put on the list, right? I think it's difficult to assess whether your payment of ransomware is going to go to one of these bad guys, let's call them. So these individuals that were placed on the list because they were involved in, for example, the Bogavech, who was involved, is the developer of CryptoLocker. He was one of the original ransomware that hit in the US. He was placed on the list. It's hard if you get hit with a ransomware to know that your payment is actually going to Bogachev, right? But I think you can assume that that is the case when you have to make a ransomware payment. In November of 2018, OFAC designated 2 Iranians for providing material support to the cyber activity by providing a payment mechanism. So they weren't actually involved in the hacking, but much like Akash described, there's a number of people in this chain. And these individuals were providing the cyber addresses to allow for the proceeds to get to the hackers. And then there's 2 more groups that were placed on the list. And I particularly like the one in December of 2019, which is called Evil Corp. So Evil Corp was placed on the OFAC list. And these are some of the cyber actors that are there. It's hard, as I said, to know who you're making a payment to. So it's important to always consider that assume that the payment is going to go to one of these parties. And that is what OFAC is, why they issued that guidance. They really want everyone to know that if you make the ransomware payment, you could be violating the law, because as a US person, you cannot make a payment to a person on that list. You cannot, and you can also not ask anyone outside the United States to make a payment indirectly for you. Next slide. So as I said, the advisory warns against making ransomware payments directly or through intermediaries. So Could you ask for permission? Generally, these are on a very tight frame, right? Tight time frame. You've been hit with a ransomware attack. You have no access to your system. You may have sensitive information and sensitive data on the system that you need to get access to. So do you have time to make an application to OFAC and explain why it's so sensitive? For example, healthcare information. There might be something that's very important for a healthcare provider that needs access to the information. So yes, you can apply for a license, but it takes a long time to get permission from OFAC. And they have already said in the guidance that generally OFAC is not predisposed to approving any of these types of applications because they feel that this is contrary to the objectives of the US. So if you are in that situation, you and your providers that you turn to, like your cyber insurance provider, and which everyone, anybody that is in business has cyber insurance. So we're to deal with these issues and the cost of these issues. You have to understand that even that provider can't make a payment on your behalf. Next. As I said, they can impose civil penalties. So let's talk about the fact that you make a choice and you want to pay it. You pay it regardless. You know that it's violating potentially the law, but you make the payment. There is, under the enforcement guidelines, they will consider mitigating factors. One, as I said, which will reduce the sanction or the fine by more than half, is generally that you self-disclose. They'll also want to understand the nature of the business, why you decided to make that payment, the steps that you took to prevent the occurrence, the fact that you made a self-disclosure, and the fact that you cooperated with law enforcement to the extent that you were hit with a ransomware and you reported to law enforcement and you fully cooperated in that process, as well as fully cooperating with OFAC. That goes a long way to getting your fine either eliminated or reduced significantly. Next. So this is just for your, I do a lot in the sanctions space. So I deal with not just these cyber sanctions. I also deal with sanctions of all kinds. These are the types of civil money penalties that we're seeing with respect to, and again, as I was saying, in 2019, the sanctions reached almost $1.3 billion, not the sanctions, the fines for violating the sanctions, almost $1.3 billion. And as I was saying, most of the fines now are going to non-financial companies. So next slide. So I'll give you a couple of examples. General Electric. So General Electric got hit with a $2.7 million settlement. So that means that the fine would have been much higher had they not settled. They were deemed to have been in violation of the Cuba sanctions. And they had accepted payments from a company that was identified on the SDN list as a Canadian company that was related to the Cuban government. GE voluntarily disclosed this, and it was deemed to be a non-egregious case. But they still paid a $2.7 million penalty. This is in October of 2019. Next slide. Expedia, another non-financial company. It was fined $325,000. It was deemed to have been providing Cuba-related travel services. They also voluntarily disclosed. They had assisted over 2,000 people in making travel arrangements without identifying that they were Cuban nationals. I think it's important. So another fine that came up recently related to Elf Cosmetics. So Elf Cosmetics is a cosmetics brand they sell in a lot of drugstores. One of the issues that they had was with respect to fake eyelashes, actually, that they sell. And they bought those fake eyelashes from a Chinese provider. They did not do any due diligence and had not, and this is important for companies that might be buying from abroad, right? They purchased goods and did not look into the supply chain of their provider. So this Chinese vendor was actually having those eyelashes manufactured in North Korea. And the US company, through this Chinese company, because they did not look further, was deemed to be in violation and ended up paying over $1 million in fines because and OFAC specifically criticized them for not having good internal controls with respect to the supply chain of their products. Next slide. So that's generally from the OFAC perspective. I think it's also important to consider some of the other legal implications relating to a ransomware attack. One is that you may have contractual obligations with some of your either customers or vendors of which you are required to report if you've had a breach. Again, remembering ransomware isn't just a blocking of your information. It's actually taking over and accessing and has full access to that information that's on your system. So you may have to disclose to a third party under some contractual obligation that that's happened. You may also, in the state of Florida, for example, the state of Florida has a law that requires you to report to the Attorney General in Florida if you've had a breach that affects more than 500, the information that relates to more than 500 individuals in the state of Florida. So other states may have similar requirements. So if you have personal information in your databases that gets attacked by ransomware, you have to think beyond. We talked about OFAC, we talked about that requirement, but you also have to look beyond that to contractual obligations as well as regulatory obligations that you may have that, again, do not only affect financial institutions, but may affect any company in our state or in the US. Next. So what to do from a legal perspective. If you're a victim of a ransomware attack, you should definitely involve your in-house counsel if you have, or outside counsel with respect to these issues. If you choose to make a payment, consider whether the party is on the SDN list. It probably is, so I would tell you that you should assume that. You should also consider whether you have enough time to ask for a specific license. And then if you want to make the payment anyway, then you definitely should consult with counsel to potentially do a self-disclosure. You have the choice not to do it, but if they do discover the violation, then the fine will be much greater. Generally, the fine can be upwards of multiples of the amount that you paid. So if you're a big company, and by the way, this guidance came out specifically as a result of Garmin's violation, of Garmin's cyber attack, and the fact that they paid ransomware. So this came out shortly thereafter. That payment was made through a third party, not directly by Garmin. And that's still, OFAC came out and talked about that in the guidance because they wanted to be sure that people understood that even if you were making the payment indirectly, it affected you. So that's it. I'll be happy to answer questions after.
Great. Thank you very much, Patricia. Next, Akash is going to talk a little bit about how to fortify your defenses to mitigate your exposure to ransomware. And also, what should you do? How should you respond if an attack happens? Akash.
So you're under a ransomware attack. What do? The first thing you should do is isolate the machine, disconnect it from the network. If there are multiple machines, segment out the network so that you can restrict the infection to just that segment. The next thing you should do is scale off the communication channels. Many strains of ransomware will try to connect with a command and control server to get an encryption key. So you need to block off the ransomware's communication channels. What you can do is fire up your favorite packet capture tool and analyze what the ransomware is doing and where it's connecting to, and then try to block it off. There are many automated tools that can make your life much easier here. Block off the IPs. Not all ransomware needs a command and control server to communicate with. Some of these are self-sufficient and they already know what they need to do. So they're going to try to scan and probe the other computers on the network and try to exploit them. What you need to do is analyze the network traffic and identify the internal ransomware communications. Once you do that, block off all of these internal IPs that are performing these probes. The next thing you should do is check online for decryption keys or tools that are used to combat ransomware attacks. A lot of these have been published because you might not be the first one to get hit by this. You can leverage the No More Ransom project to find keys and other helpful information. The website is nomoreransom.org. That's nomoreransom.org. Make sure that you secure the backup data or the systems that hold the backup data, especially if they're connected and on the same network as the infection. Isolate these machines quickly and make sure that they're free of infection. What you should also do is preserve the locked files. It's possible that decryption keys later get published online by security researchers, and you might just be able to unlock your locked files. Also, if the affected server is a virtual machine, take a read-only snapshot of the infected VMs. That way, if your recovery plan doesn't work out, you can at least get things back to the point where it started and then go again. Once you have that covered, try to restore from your backups. If your backups are handy and accessible, begin the restore process immediately and use a different machine to do that. Calculate how much data you've lost access to and how long it's going to take you to restore it, and then factor in how that's going to impact your business. Remember, sometimes you might be able to recover a lot of files from other places like emails, drives, even temporary files. This can be tedious, but it can help you reduce the impact significantly. The next thing you should do is, if you were able to restore successfully, check for infections. Make sure that you scan the machines that you restored and ensure that they don't have any infection. Antivirus scans alone are not going to cut it, so you're going to have to manually check running processes to make sure that you don't see anything suspicious. And play safe, change your passwords, all of them. The last but most important aspect is call law enforcement. The contact information of a local field office of the FBI or Secret Service should already be in your incident response plan. Also make sure that you seek legal counsel and work closely with their advice. Now, when you're in the heat of the moment trying to fight off ransomware and there's a lot of things going on, hopefully these are some of the combat tips that can help you. The first thing is try to find suspicious programs and kill them. They're not always going to be .exes, but .exes are a good starting point. If the ransomware has blocked off the Process Explorer function, forget about this step and move on. There's a lot of other things that we can do. The next thing is to hide and misguide. This is actually one of the things that you can do in advance of a ransomware attack. It's to change the extensions of interesting files and make them uninteresting. For instance, PDF can be changed to .abc or whatever you like. What you're doing is you're trying to hide these files from the ransomware. A lot of ransomware strains will just scan files in the C drive and then sequentially encrypt in alphanumeric order. So what you can do is maybe consider keeping a large number of junk files in the C drive, starting with the number 0 so that they show up on top and they are the first targets that your ransomware spends time on, and that buys you some time. The other thing that you can do when you're under attack is you can try booting into safe mode and try to remove the ransomware. If it doesn't allow that, then you'll need to mount the hard drive on a different operating system and then copy the files to a backup drive and then reinstall Windows. Or if you were successful in looking up the decryption keys online, you can actually try and decrypt it at this point. Much more important than what you do during a ransomware attack or a cyber attack is the preparation that you put in before it. So let's take a look at some of the things that you should be doing throughout the year to prepare yourself for such an attack. The first thing is to have a good information backup process and test it regularly. Some businesses that get hit by ransomware fully recover thanks to good backups. Remember though that there are some ransomware strains that are advanced and that target backups as well. So make sure that you have offline backups as well and move them to another physical location that's not connected to your current network. The next thing is to have a strong incident response plan in place. Use the guidance from NIST as your foundation. Your IRP should address the most recent cybersecurity threats and you should be updating it monthly. Also, look into buying a good cybersecurity insurance policy. The next thing is a data breach assessment. This is a very, very important assessment. It helps you answer the question, have I been hacked, but that I just don't know it yet? A lot of times, hackers are actually already inside an organization's IT infrastructure. They're lying low and either passively stealing information or waiting for the right time to strike, or both. So, perform a data breach assessment to identify if you've already had a data breach that you're not just aware of yet. You need to perform a data breach assessment every 6 months at a minimum, and it will help the organization detect the problems before they get a lot bigger. The next thing that you should be performing are comprehensive security reviews. These are highly technical, deep dive configuration level reviews of your technical infrastructure. They cover every single aspect of your infrastructure. Anything that exchanges information is part of the scope. And then you perform configuration reviews at a very deep level to ensure that these infrastructure components are securely configured. This kind of a review should be performed ideally at least once a year. Penetration testing might sound very familiar, but there's a big difference. You need to perform penetration tests that are going to simulate real life attackers. So you need the attack team to be comprised of highly skilled and experienced ethical hackers. And more importantly, you need to give this team the license to hit you with everything they've got, just like real hackers would do. So don't forget to include the Internet of Things, IoT gadgets, and other such devices as part of your penetration testing scope. For instance, CCTV cameras, printers, ATM machines are all game. They should be part of your penetration testing scope. And then security awareness training is incredibly important. You need to train your employees on cybersecurity, but don't bore them. They don't think that security is part of their job description. So what you need to do is come up with innovative, funny, engaging material that they've not seen before. And if you get it right, then an aware employee can save you more pain and money than any other cybersecurity technology can. Now, remember that everything that we've discussed in these two slides with fortifying your defenses should apply in equal measure to your third-party service providers. This is very important. You can outsource your functions, but you are still accountable for the IT security risks that come with it.
Great, Rob. I think I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you, Akash and Patricia. And Rob, if you would handle the Q&A session.
Sure, happy to. Thanks so much, Judy. And also thank you, Patricia, and thank you, Akash, for that very important presentation. A lot of stuff to dig into. And as a matter of fact, a lot of good questions are coming in about these topics specifically. So let's see how many of them we can get to. There's a question that came in kind of relating to the sanctions and what if a ransomware payment is made to an entity that is not explicitly on the list, but the funds end up in the hands of a sanctioned party? Could the payer ultimately be hit with fines and penalties?
That's part of the issue is that it's highly unlikely that the person that you're, first of all, most of these ransomware payments are being made with cryptocurrency. So it's untraceable. Most of the payments are likely going to not a party that's specifically mentioned on the OFAC list. I think what OFAC has specifically said is that you have to be careful it's not an indirect payment to those individuals or to those entities that are on the list. I think you would have a better defense if it wasn't explicit, if it wasn't an explicit party. But I would still consider doing a self-disclosure because it would protect you. In that self-disclosure, one would argue the fact that, it's not a party on the list, and, you did your best, you did your due diligence, but you still want them to know. So I think, it may indirectly end up there. I think it's a better defense that it's not a specific party, but it's probably likely that it's going to end up with one of those people.
Okay, and I'm actually going to also, while you're answering the next question, I'm going to open an anonymous poll. So, you can certainly answer this anonymously. And this poll is, has your organization been impacted by ransomware or a ransomware related incident? We hope, of course, that the number of responses, yes, are small, but we'll find out. And I think it's important that we're sharing with one another this type of information if we're willing to. So that poll is open while I ask this next question. What is the equivalent to OFAC in the United Kingdom, the European Union, abroad, etc.? How does that work?
So there's two important components to this issue abroad, right? So the UK has, through their the Treasury, their Treasury controls a consolidated list of asset freeze targets. So it's similar to the OFAC list. It also has an investment ban list. So there's two different types of lists that the UK government maintains. The EU also maintains a blocking regulation. So they have lists not as comprehensive as OFAC, and I don't think they've dealt with this issue specifically. But they have their own sets of blocked individuals. What is important, however, and it doesn't really have to do with the cyber side, both the UK and the EU have anti-boycott laws. So we in the US, for example, sanction Cuba. In the UK and in the EU, they do not sanction Cuba. And one of the laws that they have in place actually bans their citizens from complying with our laws relating to, that's what an anti-boycott regulation is. So sometimes you have to kind of, when it's a cross-border issue, it's a little bit more complicated, especially if you have subsidiaries in different countries. You may have to look a little bit further at whether those subsidiaries are subject to it. A US person under OFAC includes entities that are owned or controlled by US persons. So a foreign subsidiary that's owned by a US company is deemed to be a US company for OFAC regulations. And many times, many of the companies that have gotten in trouble is because they have a foreign subsidiary doing something that they're not supposed to be doing under US law, and that happens. So when it's a cross-border issue, it actually becomes a little bit more complex.
I can certainly imagine that to be the case. Absolutely. And there was another question that came in now that was asking again for the website, and one of the attendees also responded with that. So for everyone, that website, nomoreransomware.org, that Akash was talking about, that link is also in the chat for this session right now as well. And I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll, which was answered anonymously, and share that with everybody so that we can see the seriousness of this. Is that of those who chose to respond, which was approximately 150 people responded, there are about 12% of those respondents who say yes, they have been impacted by a ransomware or ransomware related incident. 63% said no, 25% said I don't know. So we can see that clearly, even in our attendee population, this is something that is having quite a dramatic impact, and so a very serious topic to be discussing indeed. Let's go ahead and ask another question, and that is, what steps or procedures do you see organizations not doing correctly when they're recovering from a ransomware attack? And then it's kind of a two-part question. Also, is security through obscurity really an effective control to combat ransomware. So maybe Akash, that one might be a little bit more directed towards you.
Yep. So security through obscurity, I'm a big fan of that. However, as an organization, how do you achieve that? So you're going to have a website. You're open for business. So you're going to have a website. You are exposing yourself. Your web server is exposed. You could have a remote service open right now because there's the pandemic going on. You have employees working remotely, so it's not an option. You have that open. So there's going to be exposures, and that's as soon as you open up, you're no longer obscure. And what happens with organizations? So the effective way to deal with ransomware is actually two steps. So if you divide that into two parts, it's as we covered. It's before it happens and then after it happens. The before it happens part is what we covered in the Fortify Your Defenses section. You need to have a comprehensive security review, perform penetration tests, and so on. And then when it actually happens, you need to have the backup plan in place already. So this is probably one of the biggest things that organizations should look into, which is the backup plan. So have a plan for backups. What are you going to do to recover those backups? What recovery point objective is good enough for you? So for some organizations, it's so many days, and for the others, it's just 1 day of data. It's a very big difference between the size of the organization as well. So determine those objectives and then test the backup plan, because once you have the backup plan and you haven't tested it, that's probably where a lot of organizations fall short. When you actually have the attack, you haven't really tested the plan, so you're not sure if it actually works.
Yeah, I can certainly appreciate that, right? How important it is to actually test those things. Here's an interesting question that's coming in. Can cybersecurity insurance companies deny a payment for fear of OFAC penalties, and what do we think are the chances that might start happening?
Yeah, that can start happening. I actually, I believe that cyber, as a result of that guidance in particular, I think that we'll see a change, at least in some of the language. But the language generally is that insurance company is not going to make a payment that is in violation of law, right? So that's generally an exclusion in their policy. I think that we will see more of that on the insurance side. And yes, potentially they could deny it if they have an exclusion in their policy with respect to not making a payment that violates the law. So I would assume that we're going to see more of that on the insurance side.
Yeah, that's certainly something to keep an eye on, right? And as we actually keep asking questions, I'm going to share the calendar, because we have lots of questions coming in. I want to keep going as long as we possibly can on these. And so, don't forget that tomorrow the event is in the evening. There is no lunch and learn at noon tomorrow. Instead, it's a 5:30 event in the evening. There's a link that got posted in the chat. And then, of course, you can join us tomorrow evening, and then we'll be back for our lunch and learn on Friday. So I'm going to ask another question now. What is the difference between the comprehensive review and the vulnerability assessment that was described, Akash?
Right. So a vulnerability assessment could be done at a network level. So if for instance, what you call a network vulnerability scan could qualify as a vulnerability assessment. The comprehensive security review is an all-encompassing review. So you would start with the network topology and the design of the network. Start fixing from there. Say, ask questions. Why is this segmented that way versus some other way? And then work your way up to every single element in the network infrastructure. So if you have a Windows Active Directory server, if you have a SQL database, if you have a router or switch, take all of them, take their configurations, review every single one of them, and think about, are they the most optimally set configurations as far as security goes? And that's basically the comprehensive security review.
Excellent. And there are literally dozens of questions, well, more than 10 that have come in. I get the feeling we we could go on for this quite some time. So thank you both for taking the time to talk about this really important topic. I want to remind everybody that the opportunity to serve with ISACA International and present, or ISACA South Florida, and present important thought leadership like this is certainly open to you as well, who are members of ISACA South Florida. And the nomination forms, the self-nomination forms, are available on our website now, which you can reach at isacasfl.org. There's a direct link down there also, so keep that in mind. And of course, we want to actually give people a chance to participate in today's raffle, which we're super excited about. So I'm going to launch this poll real quick, which is, would you like to opt in to participate in today's raffle by choosing yes, you acknowledge that your information, including your name and email address, may be shared with partners of ISACA South Florida who are supporting this raffle. Today, we're thrilled that ERMProtect is supporting ISACA South Florida. And so we welcome you to participate in this raffle. And there are some gift cards that are going to be given away in this raffle, and we're very excited to be able to do that. Of course, all these will be announced afterwards because we need to go ahead and gather the opt-in information now, and then subsequently we'll be able to send out that information. But you know, we look forward to reaching out to you with that good news, and we wish you the best of luck. And we'll go ahead and leave that open as we present our final slide, which is just some contact information in case you have any questions. Of course, you can feel to reach out to us. We'll see you again for this lunch and learn session on Friday. Friday at noon will be our final event for the WOW. And don't forget, tomorrow at 5:30, there's a joint session with SIM. Tomorrow, there's not a lunch and learn session. It's tomorrow at 5:30, a joint event with SIM. My deep gratitude and thanks to Judy, to Patricia, to Akash for hosting this session with us today. It is an excellent session about a critical topic that needs to continue to receive our attention. So thank you very much for joining us, and we deeply appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing all of you again very soon, either tomorrow night at 5:30 or Friday again at noon, or both. So have an excellent day, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Akash. Thanks, Patricia. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks.